The Vrathian scout ship descended through Earth's atmosphere without warning, its cloaking field shimmering like heat waves over the African savanna. Inside the cramped observation pod, Commander Zalith watched the infrared signatures below with predatory interest. The small human settlement appeared defenseless, primitive structures scattered across the grassland like toys, perfect for specimen collection. 7-year-old Katie Morris crouched behind the acacia tree, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had wandered too far from the research station where her parents worked, chasing a butterfly with iridescent wings. Now the sun was setting, and something was wrong with the sky. The air felt thick, electric, like before a thunderstorm, but different. Worse. The ship materialized 30 feet above her, blocking out the stars. Katie's scream died in her throat as blue light flooded the clearing. She pressed herself against the tree bark, feeling it dig into her back through her thin shirt. The craft was enormous up close, all smooth metal and pulsing lights that hurt to look at directly. A hatch opened with a hiss of pressurized air. 3 figures descended on platforms of light, their bodies wrong in ways Katie's mind struggled to process. Too many joints. Eyes that reflected the moonlight like a cat's, but positioned all wrong on their elongated skulls. They moved with an insect-like precision that made her stomach turn. Zelith extended a scanning tendril toward the trembling child. The readings confirmed what the initial surveys had suggested. Young, neurologically underdeveloped, perfect for the cognitive mapping experiments. The creature made a high-pitched sound, pressing itself against the vegetation. Standard fear response. The extraction would be simple. Katie tried to run, but her legs wouldn't obey. The nearest alien thing reached out with something that might have been a hand. Multiple fingers splitting into smaller fingers, moving toward her face. She squeezed her eyes shut, tears streaming down her cheeks, and did the only thing she could think of. She screamed for her mom. The honey badger emerged from its burrow 50 yards away, irritated by the noise and the strange lights invading its territory. The creature was compact, barely 3 feet long, with distinctive white and gray fur running along its back. It had been hunting for scorpions when the disturbance began. Now it paused, small eyes fixed on the scene ahead. Zelith's scanner blared a warning half a second before the animal charged. The Vrathian turned, confused by the alert. The database showed no significant threats in this sector. Large predators were kilometers away. This small creature barely registered on the threat assessment scale. The honey badger hit the first alien at full speed, claws extended, jaws already seeking vital areas. It didn't care about size or technology or the fact that this thing came from the stars. Something was threatening in its territory, and that was unacceptable. Zalith went down hard, the impact jarring in its unfamiliarity. The creature's teeth found the environmental suit's seal at the neck joint, tearing through the material with ease. Atmosphere hissed out. Zelith's second mouth opened in a shriek of pain as Earth's oxygen-rich air flooded its respiratory system like acid. The other 2 Varathians moved to assist, energy weapons charging. The honey badger released its grip and pivoted, impossibly fast, launching itself at the nearest one. Claws raked across the alien's face, shredding the delicate optical membranes. The third Vrathian fired, but the animal was already moving, the energy bolt scorching the ground where it had been a moment before. Katie watched through her fingers as the small animal tore into the creatures like they were made of paper. It moved with absolute conviction, no hesitation, no fear, just relentless, brutal efficiency. The aliens were scrambling now, their coordinated precision replaced by panic. A honey badger caught the third alien's leg, powerful jaws crushing through the joint. The creature toppled, its weapon firing wildly into the air. The animal climbed its body like a ladder, going straight for the throat equivalent. Zelith dragged itself toward the ship, leaving a trail of luminescent blood. The mission was compromised. Abort protocols engaged automatically as its suit registered critical life support failure. The remaining crew member tried to help, but the small Earth creature was relentless, attacking anything that moved. The extraction platforms activated, pulling the wounded Vrathians up toward the ship. The honey badger leaped, catching the edge of one platform with its claws, climbing even as it rose. The alien kicked frantically, but the animal held on, ascending into the craft itself. Alarms shrieked through the ship's corridors. The honey badger landed on the deck, immediately attacking the nearest crew member. Chaos erupted. The Vrathians had faced hostile species before, civilizations with advanced weapons and tactical training. They had no protocols for this, no defense against something that simply refused to stop. The ship's emergency systems registered hull integrity compromised, crew casualties mounting, primary mission failed. The decision was automatic. The vessel's engines screamed to life, acceleration pressing everyone against the bulkheads. The honey badger tumbled backward, lost its grip, and fell. Katie watched the animal land in a crouch 20 feet from where it had started, apparently unfazed. The ship was already climbing, its cloaking field flickering erratically as it gained altitude. Within seconds it was gone, leaving only a fading burn scar in the night sky. The honey badger sniffed the scorched earth where the aliens had been, found nothing of interest, and ambled back toward its burrow. It had more scorpions to hunt. Katie stayed frozen against the tree for another full minute before her legs finally started working again. She ran back toward the research station, looking over her shoulder every few steps. The honey badger didn't even glance her way. It had already forgotten the whole incident. Her parents found her stumbling through the front gate, babbling about lights and monsters and the bravest animal she'd ever seen. They assumed it was a nightmare, the product of staying up too late reading adventure stories. They gave her warm milk and tucked her into bed, checking under it for imaginary creatures. High above Earth's atmosphere, the Vrathian scout ship limped toward the rendezvous point with the main fleet. Commander Zalit's report was brief and would be met with disbelief. The planet was marked with a red warning designation, too dangerous for standard operations. Further study required from a safe distance. The honey badger never knew it had just saved a child's life or altered humanity's first contact with an alien civilization. It only knew that the noises had stopped, the lights were gone, and there was a pregnant scorpion hiding under a rock that needed its attention far more than anything else in the universe. The Vrathian Empire had encountered over 200 intelligent species in their expansion across the galaxy. They had protocols for everything from peaceful negotiation to full-scale warfare. What they didn't have was any procedure for creatures that fought with absolute disregard for self-preservation, that turned fear itself into a weapon. Back at the fleet's medical bay, the ship's physician worked frantically to save Zalith's life. The wounds were catastrophic. Venom from the creature's bite mixing with the Earth atmosphere had created a toxic reaction in the Vrathian's bloodstream. 2 of the other crew members had lost optical function permanently. The 4th had defensive wounds across 70% of its body. Admiral Korath reviewed the footage from the scout ship's external cameras with growing unease. The small creature's attack had been captured in detail, every savage moment documented. The tactical analysis computer had run the scenario 3 times, each time reaching the same conclusion. Threat level maximum. Recommended response. Avoid all contact. The footage spread through the fleet like a virus. Crew members watched in horrified fascination as the tiny Earth creature dismantled a trained extraction team in under 2 minutes. Arguments broke out in the mess halls. Some claimed the video was fabricated, that no animal could be that ferocious. Others insisted it proved Earth was a death world, exactly the kind of planet the ancient warnings had described. Katie woke up the next morning to brilliant sunshine and the smell of her father making pancakes. The night before felt distant, dreamlike. She almost believed it had been her imagination until she looked out her window and saw the scorched circle in the clearing where the acacia tree stood, right where the lights had been. She told her parents again over breakfast, adding details she'd forgotten in her panic the night before. The way the creatures moved, the strange symbols on their ship, the honey badger appearing like something out of a story. Her mother exchanged glances with her father. They decided to humor her, let her draw pictures of what she'd seen. The drawings were disturbingly consistent. Long limbs, multiple joints, eyes positioned wrong. Her father, a xenobiologist, felt something cold settle in his stomach. These weren't the monsters from her books or the movies she'd watched. The proportions were all wrong for human imagination, the details too specific. He made calls that afternoon to colleagues at other research stations. Had anyone seen unusual lights? Detected strange atmospheric readings? Most laughed it off, but 2 had similar reports. Animals acting strangely. Equipment malfunctions. One mentioned finding a circular burn mark in the grassland that their geological surveys couldn't explain. The Vrathian fleet held emergency council that evening, their time. 5 admirals sat in a virtual conference, their holographic forms flickering in the command chamber. Korath presented the evidence. The footage, the casualty reports, the planet designation recommendation. Admiral Thruss of the Second Fleet was skeptical. One animal couldn't represent an entire planet's defensive capabilities. They had weapons that could sterilize continents. One creature's lucky attack meant nothing. Korath pulled up additional data. The planet's biodiversity index was off the charts. Thousands of apex predators, many exhibiting similar fearless aggression. Records showed Earth had survived 5 mass extinction events. Life here didn't just adapt, it weaponized itself. The honey badger wasn't an anomaly. It was a warning. The vote was split, but caution won by a single decision. Earth would be observed from orbit only. No landings. No direct contact. They would watch and wait, gather data, assess whether the intelligent species posed a similar threat to the wildlife. Katie spent the afternoon searching for the honey badger. She wanted to thank it, though she knew how silly that sounded. How do you thank an animal that probably didn't even remember saving you? She brought a piece of chicken from lunch held out in her small hand as she approached the area where she'd last seen it. The honey badger was there, digging near its burrow entrance. It looked up as she approached, regarding her with those small dark eyes. Katie froze, suddenly remembering how it had torn into those creatures. The speed. The violence. The animal sniffed the air, caught the scent of chicken, and ambled over. It took the meat gently from her hand, surprisingly delicate, then returned to its burrow without ceremony. Katie smiled despite herself. It really didn't care about any of it. Not the aliens, not her gratitude, not the fact that it had fought beings from another world. The Vrathian observation post went active 2 days later, a stealth satellite positioned in high orbit. Its sensors swept across the planet, cataloging everything. The data was troubling. The dominant species had primitive technology but showed rapid advancement. More concerning were the behavior patterns. They kept the dangerous animals as companions. They studied them, filmed them, even celebrated their aggression. Specialist Vorn watched footage of humans interacting with creatures called lions, bears, crocodiles. The humans showed no fear, often deliberately provoking the animals for entertainment. They jumped into water with creatures that could kill them in seconds. They climbed mountains that regularly killed their own kind. They voluntarily threw themselves from aircraft, from bridges, from perfectly safe structures for the simple thrill of falling. The psychological profile was clear. The entire species exhibited pathological risk-seeking behavior. They didn't just survive on a death world, they thrived on it, loved it, sought out danger when their environment didn't provide enough. Katie's father found the burn mark that evening. He took samples, ran tests in his portable lab. The molecular structure was wrong, elements that shouldn't exist in those combinations, heat signatures that matched no known natural phenomenon. He filed the report with the International Research Coalition, flagging it as unexplained. The report was ignored. Too many other priorities. Climate data, wildlife migration patterns, disease tracking. One anomalous burn mark in the middle of nowhere didn't rate attention. It was archived and forgotten. The honey badger hunted through the night, fearless and relentless as always. It fought a cobra at midnight, killed it, ate it. It raided a beehive at dawn, ignoring the stings that would have sent other animals fleeing. It existed in a state of permanent readiness, every moment potential combat. Admiral Korath compiled the final report 3 weeks after the initial incident. The conclusion was unanimous among the observation team. Earth was designated a Class 5 death world, the highest threat category. The intelligent species showed signs of similar behavioral patterns to their planet's megafauna. Recommendation: quarantine the system, monitor from extreme distance. Avoid all contact until their technological development could be better assessed. The report noted one additional concern. If the humans ever achieved interstellar travel with the same fearless aggression their wildlife displayed, they would represent an unprecedented threat to galactic stability, not because they were more advanced or more numerous, but because they simply wouldn't stop. Like the honey badger. Like everything else on their terrible, beautiful world. Katie never told anyone else about that night. The drawings went into a box under her bed. Her parents stopped taking her story seriously after the first week. She grew up, became a biologist herself, studied animal behavior across the African continent. She published papers on fearless aggression in small predators, using honey badgers as primary examples. Sometimes at conferences, after a few drinks, she would tell the story of the night she was 7 years old. The lights in the sky, the creatures with too many joints, the honey badger that appeared like a guardian spirit and sent them running. People laughed, assumed it was a metaphor or a childhood dream she'd never quite shaken. The Vrathian Empire continued its expansion in other directions, cataloging worlds, uplifting species, building their coalition. Earth remained marked in red on every star chart. Forbidden, quarantined. The story of the honey badger incident became something of a legend among the younger crews, a cautionary tale told in the barracks. The honey badger lived another 8 years, ruling its territory with absolute authority. It fought leopards, hyenas, even a young lion once. It survived snake bites that would have killed animals 5 times its size. It took what it wanted and gave up nothing. When it finally died, it was of old age, having never once backed down from a fight. Katie visited the burrow one last time when she heard from the local rangers. The honey badger had been found curled up inside, peaceful in death. She stood at the entrance, remembering that night 20 years ago, remembering how something so small had faced the unknown without hesitation. She whispered a thank you into the darkness and walked away. Somewhere high above, far beyond the edge of the solar system, a Vrathian observation post recorded her presence at the coordinates and flagged it for review. The AI noted the correlation to the original incident location. The report was filed and archived. The galaxy continued to turn. Humanity continued to grow, to learn, to reach for the stars with the same reckless determination that characterized everything on their world. And somewhere in the vast bureaucracy of the Vrathian Empire, a file remained open, a red warning that would not be forgotten. Earth was dangerous. Not because of its weapons or its technology, because when threatened, life on that planet didn't calculate odds or consider retreat. It didn't matter if you came from the stars or commanded fleets or wielded weapons beyond comprehension. On Earth, even the smallest creatures would look at the universe itself and decide they weren't impressed. They would fight anyway. They would win anyway. The honey badger had taught the Vrathians a lesson they would carry for generations. There are things in the universe more dangerous than superior firepower. There is stubbornness. There is fearlessness. There is the absolute conviction that no threat, no matter how vast, is worth running from. And on a small blue world circling an unremarkable star, that conviction was built into every living thing. The story should have ended there, but the universe has a sense of irony. 25 years after Katie's encounter, the Vrathian Empire faced its first major crisis. The Zenthi Collective had emerged from dark space, a swarm intelligence that consumed everything in its path. World after world fell to their relentless advance. The Empire's military was formidable, but the Zenthi adapted to every strategy, every weapon. They had no fear because they had no individuals to lose. They simply kept coming, wave after wave, until defenses crumbled and civilizations died. The Vrathian fleets were being pushed back toward the core systems. Admiral Korath, now ancient and nearing retirement, sat in the strategic command center watching his civilization begin to fail. They needed allies, anyone who could help turn the tide. His tactical AI suggested the unthinkable. Earth. The humans had achieved interstellar capability 5 years earlier. Their ships were crude but effective. Their military forces small but well-trained. The AI's reasoning was sound, terrifying, and simple. If the Zenthi were an unstoppable force, they needed to find something that refused to be stopped. They needed the humans. They needed a species that produced honey badgers. Katie was 42 years old, director of xenobiological studies at the East African Research Institute when the first official alien contact occurred. Not with her personally, but with the United Earth Council in Geneva. The message was diplomatic, cautious, and desperate. The Vrathian Empire requested a meeting to discuss mutual concerns.
The council was divided. Half wanted to refuse, to maintain Earth's careful isolation.
The other half saw opportunity. Technology transfers. Galactic citizenship, an end to humanity's lonely existence in the cosmos. The vote took 3 days and passed by the smallest margin. Katie wasn't at the first meeting, but she was called in for the second when the Vrathian delegation requested a specific expert on fearless aggression and Earth's wildlife. She walked into the conference room and came face to face with Admiral Korath himself, projected holographically but unmistakable, the elongated skull, the wrong-placed eyes. Too many joints. She stopped breathing for a full 5 seconds. Korath noticed her reaction, consulted his files, and felt something very much like human surprise. The child from the incident. Grown. Educated. One of their leading scientists. The universe had delivered her to him like a message he couldn't ignore. They spoke alone for an hour, Katie demanding the truth, Korath providing it. The footage from that night. The casualty reports. The quarantine designation. The reason Earth had been left alone for 3 decades. She listened to it all with growing understanding and something that might have been pride. When he explained the current crisis, the Zenthi threat, the desperate need for allies who wouldn't break under pressure, Katie laughed. It started small but built until tears ran down her face. Korath waited, confused, until she finally composed herself enough to explain. They had avoided Earth because they thought humanity was too dangerous. Now they needed humanity precisely because they were dangerous. The irony was perfect, beautiful. Exactly the kind of cosmic joke the universe specialized in. Katie made one call to her old friend Marcus Chen, now an admiral in the Earth Defense Fleet. She explained the situation, the history, what the Vrathians were asking. Marcus was quiet for a long time, then asked a single question. What would a honey badger do? Katie smiled. A honey badger would see a threat to its territory, to the things it protected. and it would attack without hesitation. It wouldn't care about odds or enemy numbers. It would just fight until the threat was gone or it was dead, and it would probably win because the other side had never encountered anything that simply refused to lose. The Earth Defense Fleet deployed 3 weeks later, 12 ships carrying humanity's best and most reckless. They met the Zenthi at a contested system on the edge of Rathian space. The aliens poured out of dark space like locusts, thousands of bioships moving in perfect coordination. The human ships charged straight into the swarm. Korath watched from his command vessel, hanging back with the Vrothian fleet as agreed. The tactical displays showed madness. The human ships weren't following any known combat doctrine. They broke formation immediately, each captain making independent decisions, attacking whatever target looked interesting. One ship deliberately rammed a Zenthi dreadnought, its crew ejecting in pods moments before impact. The Zenthi tried to adapt to coordinate a response, but they had no protocols for this. The humans didn't fight like a military force. They fought like 12 independent honey badgers, each one absolutely convinced it was going to win through sheer stubbornness and creative violence. Captain Lisa Martinez took her ship, the Indomitable, straight through a Zenthi formation, firing in all directions. When her weapons overheated, she used the ship's bulk as a battering ram. When her shields failed, she vented atmosphere to create improvised thrust for evasive maneuvers. When her engineers said they were dead in space, she told them to get creative or get out of her way. The Zenthi started making mistakes, confusion spreading through their networked intelligence. These new enemies didn't follow predictable patterns. They took damage that should have forced retreat and kept fighting. They celebrated when things went wrong, whooping over their communications channels as systems failed and odds worsened. Marcus Chen, commanding from the Roosevelt, watched a Zenthi bioship try to flee from Lieutenant Jake Morrison's corvette. He burst out laughing. They'd done it. They'd made the unstoppable enemy afraid. The Zenthi had encountered something their collective intelligence couldn't process. Individual humans who fought with the same logic as Earth's wildlife. No logic at all, just aggression and absolute conviction. The battle lasted 6 hours. The human fleet lost 4 ships and took catastrophic damage across the rest. But the Zenthi retreated, withdrew into dark space, and didn't return. The swarm intelligence flagged the sector as too costly, designated the new species as threat level critical, and redirected its expansion elsewhere. Korath received Martinez's damage report and felt something very much like respect. Her ship was holding together through force of will and emergency welds. Her crew had suffered 60% casualties. She was already asking when the next engagement was scheduled. The Vrathian Empire offered humanity a formal alliance the next day. Full technological exchange. Mutual Defense Pact. Representatives in the Galactic Council. Earth accepted with the casual confidence of people who had just discovered they were exactly as dangerous as they'd always suspected. Katie watched the news coverage from her office in Kenya, thinking about a 7-year-old girl and a honey badger that refused to be impressed by aliens. Humanity hadn't won that battle through superior technology or numbers. They'd won because they were from Earth, where everything fought like the universe owed them an apology for existing. The story spread across human space within days. 12 ships versus an alien swarm that had conquered dozens of civilizations. Victory through sheer refusal to accept defeat. New recruits flooded the defense fleet. Veterans told stories in bars about the time humanity looked at the galaxy's nightmare and decided it wasn't that impressive. Other species began approaching Earth with trade offers, alliance proposals, requests for military advisors. The Vrathians had been right to quarantine Earth, but wrong about the conclusion. Humans weren't too dangerous to contact. They were too dangerous to leave isolated. Better to have them as allies than let them figure out the galaxy on their own. Katie received a personal message from Korath 6 months after the battle. He wanted to thank her for the conversation that had led to the alliance. He also wanted her to know that the honey badger footage was now required viewing in Vrothian military academies, an example of the mindset they needed to defeat overwhelming odds. She wrote back with a suggestion. If they really wanted to understand human combat psychology, they should study the honey badger's entire behavioral profile. Fearlessness, aggression, absolute refusal to back down. But also something else. The honey badger didn't fight because it hated its enemies or wanted conquest. It fought because something threatened its territory, its food, its existence. It fought to protect what was its. Humanity was the same. They'd entered the battle not for glory or expansion, but because the Zenthi threatened the Vrathians, and the Vrathians had asked for help. That made it humanity's fight. That made it personal. Touch one, fight all. Ancient pack behavior written into human DNA and amplified by culture. Korath shared the insight with the military leadership. It changed their entire strategic approach. They stopped trying to match the Zenti's coordinated tactics and instead adopted human-style independent operations. Small units with broad authority to improvise. Captains who were encouraged to take risks instead of following rigid protocols. It was terrifying for a culture built on precision and planning, but it worked. The war turned slowly, system by system. The Zenthi couldn't adapt to the new strategy because there was nothing to adapt to. Every battle was different, every engagement unpredictable. Human advisors trained Vrathian crews in what they called aggressive creativity, the ability to look at a hopeless situation and find the angle nobody expected. Katie published a paper comparing human military psychology to African wildlife behavior. It became required reading in 3 different alien military academies. She argued that Earth's hostile environment had selected for a specific type of survivor, not the biggest or smartest, but the most stubborn. The ones who looked at a problem and decided the problem was wrong, not them. The honey badger remained her primary example, an animal that weighed 30 pounds but fought leopards, that ate venomous snakes for breakfast, that could be injured, bleeding, literally being eaten by bees, and would still complete whatever task it had set itself. No quit, no surrender, just relentless forward motion until the universe gave up and let it win. 5 years into the war, the Zenti made their first attempt at negotiation. They had never communicated before, never indicated anything but mindless consumption. The message arrived at human space first, directed specifically to Earth. The swarm intelligence had analyzed all available data and reached a conclusion. Humanity represented an unacceptable risk factor. The Zenthi proposed a truce. They would avoid human space and allied territories. In exchange, humanity would cease military operations and allow the swarm to expand in other directions. It was a logical offer. The Zenthi would still consume countless worlds, but Earth and its allies would be safe. Marcus Chen, now a fleet admiral, read the proposal and thought about honey badgers. What would they do if offered a deal that saved their territory but sacrificed others? The answer was obvious. They'd keep fighting because the fight wasn't just about territory, it was about principle. You don't negotiate with bullies. You don't let threats exist just because they promise to threaten someone else. Earth rejected the offer within an hour. The message back was brief. The war continues until the Zenthi stop consuming civilizations or stop existing. No middle ground. No compromise. The galaxy would be safe for everyone or the fight would never end. The Zenthi had never encountered this response. Species fought for survival, for resources, for advantage. They didn't fight for principle. They didn't reject favorable terms because other unknown species might suffer. The swarm intelligence recalculated human threat assessment and upgraded it to maximum. These creatures were worse than dangerous.
They were irrational. Katie smiled when she heard about the rejection.
The council had debated for 30 minutes before voting, but she'd known what the decision would be from the start. Humanity had learned its values from a world that didn't tolerate predators. Every ecosystem on Earth was defined by competition, by the constant pressure to defend territory and resources. Humanity had taken that lesson and expanded it to galactic scale. The final battle happened 3 years later, deep in Zenthi space. A combined fleet of human, Vrathian, and 6 other allied species pushed into the swarm's primary staging area. The Zenthi threw everything at them. Billions of bioships, weapons that rewrote physics, tactics refined across 1,000 conquered civilizations. Martinez commanded the human contingent from a new ship, also called Indomitable because she'd refused any other name. Her crew was hand-picked, volunteers who'd read the casualty projections and signed up anyway. Earth had sent its best and most reckless, the ones who heard impossible odds and felt excitement instead of fear. The battle opened with a Zenthi ambush, exactly as expected. The Allied fleet found itself surrounded, outnumbered 50-1, with reinforcements 3 days away. Standard doctrine called for retreat, for preservation of forces, for living to fight another day. Martinez opened fleet communications and asked if anyone wanted to leave. Silence, then laughter. Then Captain Ryan Foster's voice cutting through. He'd lost his ship in the first Zenthi engagement, spent 6 months in recovery, and demanded to return to service the moment he could walk. His question was simple. Anyone who retreats buys the first round when we get home. Deal? The Allied fleet charged. No formation, no coordination, just pure aggressive intent. The Zenthi tried to envelop them, to use numbers and tactics to compensate for the human factor. It didn't work. Human ships broke through their lines like they were made of paper. Brathian vessels followed, mimicking the strategy, abandoning centuries of careful doctrine for glorious chaos. Katie watched the battle feeds from Earth, holding her breath. The Zenthi had adapted, learned, prepared specifically for human unpredictability. But they'd made one critical error. They'd assumed unpredictability was a tactic, something that could be countered with enough data. They didn't understand it was a philosophy. Martinez took the Indomitable straight at the Zenthi command cluster, a mass of bioships coordinating the swarm's movements. Her tactical officer advised against it. The defenses were too thick. They'd never make it through. Martinez asked him to define never, then punched the engines to maximum. They made it halfway before the shields failed, 3/4 before the hull started coming apart. Martinez ordered all non-essential crew to the escape pods, then kept flying with the skeleton team. The Indomitable was dying, systems cascading into failure, but it still had momentum and one working weapon. She fired the main cannon at point-blank range into the command cluster's central node. The explosion lit up the tactical displays across the entire battlefield. The Zenthi formation stuttered, coordination failing as the swarm intelligence lost cohesion. Individual bioships started making independent decisions, proving they weren't ready for that level of autonomy. The Allied fleet exploited the confusion mercilessly. What had been a coordinated defense became a disorganized retreat. The Zenthi fell back, regrouped, fell back again. Within 6 hours, they were fleeing their own space, leaving behind resource nodes and staging areas they'd held for decades. Martinez survived. The Indomitable didn't, breaking apart in the final engagement, but the crew pods were recovered. She woke up in a Vrathian medical ship with Admiral Korath standing over her bed. He informed her that she was being awarded the highest military honors from 7 different species and was hereby banned from commanding any vessel ever again because her tendency to deliberately crash ships was causing insurance nightmares. She told him that was fair, then asked when she could get back to work. Korath made a sound that the translator interpreted as a laugh. Definitely human influence. Definitely the honey badger effect. Definitely the best decision the Empire had ever made. The Zenthi didn't surrender because swarm intelligences don't have the concept. They simply stopped expanding, pulled back to a small cluster of systems and went dormant. Analysis suggested they were reevaluating their entire strategic model. The data they'd gathered about humanity didn't fit any known pattern. They needed time to process what they'd encountered. Earth became the de facto military leader of the Alliance. Other species contributed numbers and resources, but humans provided the psychological edge. The willingness to take risks, the refusal to accept defeat, the ability to look at terrible odds and find them motivating rather than discouraging. Katie was invited to speak at the Galactic Council's annual conference. She stood before representatives from 200 species and talked about a honey badger, about fearlessness born from environmental pressure, about the value of controlled aggression in a universe that often rewarded it, about how Earth's hostile ecosystem had created the perfect soldiers by accident. The speech was well received, but Katie added something at the end that the council hadn't expected. A warning. Humanity's greatest strength was also a potential weakness. They didn't know when to stop fighting. They needed allies to provide context, perspective, to tell them when aggression was necessary versus when it was just destructive. The honey badger was fearless, but it was also a solitary animal. It didn't build civilizations or form lasting alliances. Humanity couldn't afford to be that isolated. They needed the Vrathians and the others to remind them that the universe wasn't just a series of fights to win. Sometimes you could just exist peacefully. Korath stood and thanked her for the honesty. He added his own observation. The Vrathians had spent centuries avoiding conflict, building systems of negotiation and diplomacy. It had made them soft, unwilling to fight even when fighting was necessary. They needed humanity to remind them that sometimes violence was the answer, that some threats couldn't be reasoned with. The alliance was stronger because neither species had to be complete. Humans could be the fist, and Vrathians could be the mind. Together they covered weaknesses and amplified strengths. The honey badger needed the ecosystem just as much as the ecosystem needed apex predators to maintain balance. Katie returned to Earth a month later, exhausted and ready to get back to her research. She'd spent 5 years thinking about interstellar war and diplomatic theory. She wanted to spend the next 5 years studying animals that didn't carry weapons or negotiate treaties. Simple creatures doing simple things for simple reasons. She visited the old research station where her parents had worked, now a museum dedicated to Earth's early days of isolation. There was an exhibit about the night the aliens came, using her childhood drawings and the Vrathian footage that had been declassified. Tourist groups came through daily, marveling at the small animal that had changed galactic history. The honey badger's burrow was marked with a memorial plaque. Katie read it with mixed feelings. The animal hadn't been a hero or a warrior. It had just been a honey badger doing what honey badgers do. The galaxy had assigned meaning to the encounter, but the animal itself had no concept of its importance. She found that thought comforting. Humanity's rise to galactic prominence hadn't been planned or orchestrated. They hadn't set out to become the Alliance's military core or to change how civilizations thought about warfare. They'd just been humans acting like humans, and the universe had decided that was exactly what it needed. The next generation of Earth's children grew up with the story, The Frightened Girl and the Fearless Animal. The aliens who learned that Earth's creatures didn't respect intimidation. It became a cultural touchstone, a reminder of where humanity came from and what made them special. But Katie noticed something troubling in the retellings. The story was being sanitized, made more heroic. The honey badger was portrayed as a guardian spirit, fighting to protect the innocent. The reality had been less noble. The animal had attacked because something loud and strange had invaded its territory. Pure territorial aggression, nothing more. She started giving talks at schools, correcting the mythology. The honey badger wasn't a hero. It was an animal following instinct. Humanity's strength came from the same place. Instinctive responses to threats that happened to work on a galactic scale. But instinct without intelligence was just violence. Humanity needed to understand the difference. The message resonated with some, frustrated others. People wanted heroes and legends. They wanted to believe the universe had chosen Earth for a special purpose. Katie insisted on honesty instead. Earth was special because it was hostile enough to breed fearlessness, but complex enough to breed intelligence. The combination was rare but not unique. Other species would eventually develop similar traits. Marcus Chen visited her one evening bringing wine and questions about the future. The war was over, but the military was preparing for the next one. The Zenthi might return. New threats would emerge. Earth needed to maintain readiness, which meant maintaining the aggressive culture that had won the war. Katie asked him if he'd ever seen what happened to honey badgers in captivity. They became destructive, attacking keepers and other animals, unable to channel their aggression productively. Fearlessness without purpose was just chaos. Humanity needed to find peacetime applications for their strongest traits. They talked through the night, building a proposal. Military training that emphasized the psychology behind human tactics. Cultural exchanges with less aggressive species to provide balance. Research programs studying other death worlds, looking for species that had evolved similar traits and how they'd integrated into galactic society. The proposal went to the Council 6 months later. It was approved with minor modifications. Earth established the first Comparative Death World Studies Institute, bringing together researchers from across the galaxy to study high-pressure environments and their effects on intelligent life. Katie became the director, using her fame to recruit the best minds. They studied everything, from Earth's honey badgers to ice-world predators that hunted in methane storms. The goal was understanding, not just military application. How did different types of environmental pressure shape psychology, culture, warfare, diplomacy? The findings were fascinating. Death worlds produced fearless species, but the type of fearlessness varied. Earth's creatures were aggressive, attack-oriented, willing to take damage to deliver damage. Other worlds produced different strategies. Hyper-efficient predators that never wasted energy. Pack hunters with perfect coordination. Ambush specialists with infinite patience. Humanity's specific brand of controlled chaos wasn't inevitable. It was a product of Earth's particular mix of threats. Predators from every direction, no safe ecological niche, constant pressure to fight for resources. Other death worlds with different threat profiles produced different survival strategies. The research had immediate practical applications. The Alliance started recruiting from other death worlds, looking for species with complementary combat psychologies. They found crystal-based life forms that were nearly indestructible, perfect for holding defensive positions, aquatic species that excelled at three-dimensional combat in space, desert survivors who could operate in resource-scarce environments indefinitely. Katie watched the Alliance evolve from Earth-centric to truly diverse. Humanity remained important, but they weren't the only answer anymore. They were one answer among many, each valuable in different contexts. The honey badger had opened the door, but what walked through was much larger than any single species. 10 years after the war ended, the Zenthi sent another message, not a surrender or negotiation, but a question. They wanted to understand human motivation. Their collective intelligence had analyzed every battle, every decision, every seemingly irrational choice. The data suggested humans fought for reasons beyond survival or resources. They needed clarification. Earth sent Katie as its representative. She met with a Zenthi avatar in neutral space, a bioconstruct designed specifically for communication. It asked her directly why humanity had rejected the truce offer. Why sacrifice safety for abstract principles? Why fight for species they'd never met? She told it about the honey badger. About a small animal that fought a leopard not because it could win, but because it refused to lose. About how Earth's entire ecosystem was built on that same principle. Territory wasn't just space, it was identity. You fought for it because letting it go meant ceasing to exist in any meaningful way. The Zenthi avatar was quiet for a long time, processing. Then it asked the critical question. Did humans consider the entire galaxy their territory? Katie said no. They considered it their responsibility. Different concept. Territory you owned. Responsibility you maintained. Not for profit or control, but because letting predators run free damaged everyone. The Zenthi updated their threat assessment one final time. Humanity wasn't just dangerous because they wouldn't stop fighting. They were dangerous because they'd fight anyone's battle if they decided it was important. The swarm intelligence had no concept for that behavior. It filed humanity under unknown variables and withdrew even further from civilized space. Katie returned to Earth satisfied. The Zenthi wouldn't be allies, but they understood enough to leave everyone alone. That was the best outcome anyone could hope for. Some species just couldn't integrate into galactic society. The important thing was making sure they didn't threaten those who could. She retired from the Institute at 60, tired of politics and bureaucracy. She went back to the grasslands, back to field research, back to watching animals be animals without assigning them galactic significance. It was peaceful in a way her life hadn't been for decades. The honey badgers were still there, still fearless, still completely unimpressed by anything the universe threw at them. Katie spent her days observing, taking notes, remembering why she'd loved this work in the first place. No hidden meanings, no cultural implications, just behavior and response, action and consequence. One afternoon, she watched a young honey badger face down a hyena 3 times its size. The hyena retreated, confused and frustrated. Katie laughed. Nothing had changed. Earth kept producing creatures that refused to acknowledge reality's constraints. The galaxy would just have to keep learning to deal with it. She wrote one final paper published on her 65th birthday, a retrospective on 30 years of Death World studies and humanity's place in galactic culture. The conclusion was simple. Earth hadn't saved the galaxy or changed everything. They just added one more voice to an ongoing conversation about how to survive in a hostile universe. The honey badger was important not because it was unique, but because it was honest. It didn't pretend to be something it wasn't. It didn't apologize for its nature or try to soften its edges. It existed fully, completely, exactly as evolution had made it. Humanity's greatest contribution to galactic society was the same honesty. We're aggressive, we're stubborn, we don't quit. Deal with it or don't, but don't ask us to be different. The paper was well received in some circles, controversial in others. Katie didn't care. She'd said what needed saying. The rest was up to the next generation to figure out. They'd grown up with aliens and interstellar travel. They'd decide what humanity became, not her. Katie Morris died at 73 peacefully in her sleep after a day spent watching wildlife. The obituaries called her the mother of comparative death world studies, the woman who explained humanity to the galaxy. She would have preferred to be remembered as someone who loved animals and asked good questions, but you don't always get to choose your legacy. Her funeral was attended by representatives from 40 species. Admiral Korath came personally, ancient now and moving slowly but insistent on paying respects. He spoke briefly about their first meeting, about the child who'd survived an encounter that should have been impossible, about how that child had grown into someone who helped build bridges between civilizations. Marcus Chen gave the final eulogy. He talked about honey badgers and fearlessness and the importance of understanding where your strength comes from. He told the story of the night Katie was 7 years old, alone and terrified, saved by an animal that didn't know the meaning of surrender. He explained how that moment had shaped everything that came after, for her and for humanity. The galaxy moved on. New threats emerged and were dealt with. The Alliance grew stronger, incorporating lessons from Earth and dozens of other worlds. Humanity remained important but not dominant, influential but not controlling. They'd found their place as the voice of aggressive determination, balanced by other species with different strengths. The honey badger's burrow became a pilgrimage site. Tourists from across the galaxy came to see where it had all started, where one small animal had faced the unknown and changed the course of history without knowing or caring. The local rangers got tired of explaining that it was just a burrow, nothing special, but people needed symbols and stories. Earth continued producing fearless humans, sending them out to explore and fight and build. Each generation added something new to humanity's galactic identity. Warriors became diplomats. Explorers became teachers. The initial reputation for controlled chaos evolved into something more nuanced, but the core remained. Humanity didn't back down. Couldn't back down. Wouldn't even consider it. Other death worlds were discovered, some producing species even more aggressive than humanity. Earth welcomed them into the Alliance, shared lessons learned, helped them navigate the transition from isolated evolution to galactic citizenship. The institute Katie had founded became the primary resource for understanding high-pressure adaptation across all known species.
The Vrathian Empire evolved too.
The honey badger incident remained required study in military academies, but now it was paired with human diplomatic successes and failures. The lesson wasn't just about fearlessness, but about knowing when to fight and when to talk.
Korath's legacy was an empire that could do both, switching between approaches as the situation demanded. 100 years after the first contact, historians analyzed what had changed.
The galaxy before humans had been cautious, diplomatic, built on complex negotiation and careful resource management, not better or worse, just different. Humanity had added urgency, risk-taking, the willingness to bet everything on uncertain outcomes. Some civilizations thrived under the new paradigm. Others struggled, finding the accelerated pace exhausting. The galaxy accommodated both, creating regions of space with different cultural norms. High-intensity zones where human influence dominated, calm sectors where traditional diplomacy ruled, and everything between. The story of the frightened child and the fearless honey badger became mythology, taught in schools across hundreds of worlds. Like all myths, it grew larger than the truth. The honey badger became a symbol of resistance, of standing up to overwhelming force. Katie became the prophet who'd explained humanity to itself and the galaxy. But deep in the African grasslands, where none of the galactic significance mattered, honey badgers continued their ancient patterns, fighting snakes, raiding beehives, defending territory with absolute conviction. They didn't know they were famous. Didn't care that their behavioral patterns had been studied by alien scientists and military strategists. They were just honey badgers, doing honey badger things exactly as they'd done for millions of years before humans built cities or looked up at the stars. And somewhere in that continuity, in that absolute refusal to change or compromise, was the lesson that really mattered. The universe was vast and old and full of things that wanted to hurt you. You could spend your life being cautious, calculating odds, avoiding risk. Or you could be a honey badger. You could look at the impossible and decide it was someone else's problem. You could fight when fighting made no sense, stand when standing seemed stupid, refuse to quit because quitting wasn't in your vocabulary. Earth had chosen its path long before humans existed. Every ecosystem, every predator, every struggling piece of life on that hostile blue world had made the same choice. Fight or die, and if you were going to die anyway, at least make them work for it. That wasn't wisdom or philosophy. It was just how things were. Humanity had taken that lesson and carried it to the stars. They'd made it part of their identity, their culture, their contribution to galactic civilization, and maybe that was enough. Maybe being the species that didn't quit, that charged impossible odds, that looked at the universe and refused to be impressed, was exactly the role they were meant to play. The honey badger that saved Katie Morris had been dead for over a century. Its descendants still hunted the same territory, fighting the same battles, winning the same victories. Nothing had changed for them. Everything had changed for the galaxy, and that asymmetry, that disconnect between cosmic significance and individual indifference was somehow perfect. Katie had understood that better than anyone. The honey badger didn't save her because she was special or because the universe needed humanity to reach the stars. It saved her because something loud had invaded its space and needed to be dealt with. The meaning came later, assigned by minds that needed patterns and purpose. The truth was simpler and harder. Sometimes you fight because fighting is what you do. Sometimes you survive because giving up isn't an option. Sometimes you change the galaxy because you were too stubborn to know you couldn't. And sometimes, just sometimes, being a small angry creature from a hostile world is exactly what the universe needs.